Hello and welcome to Low Society. Today we have a very, very special guest for you guys. We have Fox from the YouTube channel Space Commune. And Fox has just done a really brilliant sort of Adam Curtis style video on Breadtube. Would you like to talk a little bit about yourself, Fox, and also let people know about your video and where they can find you?
Sure. So yeah, I like to make videos on the old YouTube, and I guess my politics are left leaning, although it's getting harder and harder to say that these days because the left is really shape shifting. But I do like to come from a materialist perspective on things. Yeah, I'm just coping with the shitty dystopia we all live in right now, right?
It was really your video. I've seen quite a few of your videos, and you have a really strong style and a strong sort of voice as well. But this one really blew me out of the water. It was sort of an Adam Curtis style sort of analysis of this new media, especially sort of using Breadtube as like a demographic of analysis. And me and Peter recently just had a big messy breakup with Breadtube. So it came out kind of serendipitously during the whole period of time and stuff. But would you like to talk a little bit about your experiences with Breadtube, like how you found it, what you think about it, what made you become disillusioned with it, all of those different things?
I first discovered like ContraPoints back in like late 2017 because I was like, what does non-binary mean? Like, I heard people talking about the word non-binary. I'm like, what the fuck is non-binary? So I just like looked up on YouTube, and that was sort of my entrance into what is sort of like leftist YouTube, or considered leftist YouTube. And my political leanings had already been left leaning, and you know, I was like, oh, this is interesting. I found your channel, Angie. I found Peter's channel, and it's like, this is cool stuff. But I'm like, the real shit going on is like, you know, in the day-to-day stuff, and I want to get involved locally, and I want to organize, and I want to do all this, you know. I want to like get shit done, you know. But then quickly I learned how fucked up all that stuff is too. And you know, I know originally we were going to talk about like the other video that I put out earlier this year about the nonprofit industrial complex, and I just happen to live in like the weirdest place to be, like right at the foot of Peter Buffett and his Novo Foundation, which is like the leftist billionaire foundation. So it's funny because like I got kind of like alienated from real life stuff, so now I've kind of retreated back into the internet, and it feels good to kind of just put my to just cope by making art and videos. So
I guess that was the initial appeal for me as well, was sort of wanting to find a way to artistically examine and sort of purge political ideas and thoughts that were either haunting me or that I found interesting. And I didn't really realize that there was this like huge sort of demographic with all of these like crazy conventions until it was like a too far, sort of too late type of thing. Yeah, Peter, what about your experience? What was because I know that you've been on YouTube for like 10 years.
Yeah, I've been on YouTube since 2006. And, you know, I kind of made semi-political, but also sometimes non-political comedy stuff. And I just drifted more and more politically through the years. And then Gamergate happened. And a lot of the stuff that is talked about in Fox's video, honestly, sort of provided me a direction in some ways. And I just gradually, you know, I had read Marx at some point and just thought, you know, actually, also the also the Bernie Sanders campaign happened, and that made me believe. Sanders. Yeah, Brittany Sanders.
That's the perfect like synthesis. I feel like Brittany Sanders would definitely be the hero of the working class.
If Bernie Sanders looked like Britney Spears, he would be fucking president right now.
But the Bernie Sanders campaign sort of made it seem like something was possible. And so I shifted what I was doing into this stuff. Like, I don't have necessarily exactly the same interests in making content. I actually care about really pushing politics I care a lot about that stuff. And that's the main reason why I was like, all right, fuck it. I'm not going to just make straight comedy anymore. I'm just going to talk about what I think. And it just so happened that there was a demographic arising that sort of supported that sort of thing. And also, I thought aligned with me politically at the time. And in about 2016, I just sort of, I adopted some of the conventions of the video essay, for instance, etc. And well, here we are. We're in 2020, and I've been, Angie has as well, but you and I have both kind of been ringing the alarms for years on Breadtube as to what this, actually is or potentially is or anything like that. And to see it, like your video it's very well researched. It uses a lot of, actual, marketing. Like you talk about Bernays, you talk about values and lifestyles, which that stuff is stuff that I've talked about a lot. You used a lot of clips from both manufacturing consent and from Century of the Self, which are both deep dives into how media sort of manipulates us and puts forward a narrative that we don't ultimately control. We are under control by it. And for me, this video was like kind of the centralization of that. Like this so perfectly crystallized what Breadtube is, but also at the same time is kind of like another case study for manufacturing consent, or like Angie said, an update to Century of the Self that incorporates new media stuff that has arisen over the last 20 years.
It's interesting to me, though, because one really huge part of it that you sort of touched on was the lifestyle marketing aspect of it. And here's a little tea. I'm going to spill a little tea. Way back when I was a baby creator and I was the sort of Breadtube demographic was trying to adopt me into the fold, mainly because they needed a black face. I was invited to go and talk at a university along with a bunch of really prominent Breadtubers and
people mentioned in the video.
Yeah, people who you mentioned in the video. And the audience was sort of largely sort of, university students who were engaging with this sort of content. But I was expecting to go and see people who were sort of critical examiners, but really it felt like fans at a concert. That was sort of what it felt like, which I was surprised by and sort of disturbed by. And, there were certain catchphrases because I realized that a lot of what I was saying wasn't getting a response from the audience as much. People were like, what the fuck is this bitch talking about? Like, she's saying stuff about like capitalism, like what the fuck? But then as soon as I said like something like bread pilled, they all started like clapping and like fucking falling around and falling over themselves and shit. And it was like, okay, so this is like a demographic and there are conventions and there are passwords and there are affects and there are personality traits and ways of being and certain politics that you have to adopt in order to be considered. And that was the moment of alienation for me, where I was like, this isn't me. This isn't what I'm a part of. And this isn't the sort of life. This is all about a specific kind of lifestyle. And I wondered if you would talk a bit about that. Like, what do you think, what lifestyle signifiers do you think that this demographic sort of evokes? Because I feel like lifestyle is definitely a really big part of it.
Yeah, well, what's funny is in the middle of the video where Anita Sarkeesian is on the Colbert Report, and he says, it's a culture war, and he's like sort of joking about it. And it's like, that's exactly what it is. It
exactly
is
what it is. Yeah.
A culture war. And and like this fandom behavior, I think that's like what you're describing is this behavior where people aren't really like using critical thinking skills. They're just sort of like behaving as if it's a football game and they're just rooting for their team. And that kind of like model and behavior works really well for capitalism. So, it's so hard to like break out of that. I think people forget that we're on the side where we're trying to build up a mass of people in order to affect change, because we're trying to move the world towards a position that is better for the majority of people. And people forget like, oh, the way to get a majority of people is to not be like divided over stupid shit that doesn't matter.
That's also like the side effect of of market demographic creation. It literally segments, like it's market segmentation is the term that is typically used for it.
It's like that should be like one of the most fundamental things of like being on whatever the left is or whatever you want to call it. I mean, I'm at the point where I hate calling it the left. I know, Angie, you've said like, no, we have to hold on to that. You know, it's our term. But I'm like at such a crossroad at this point where I'm like, I don't feel like I associate with anybody who calls themselves, you know, a leftist anymore. It's like the term is kind of lost a lot.
I feel the same way about that, but I'm just a bit of a hopeless optimist. That's that. I'm just a bit. I'm kind of like don't surrender the territory. Like it doesn't even belong to them. But then again, you could be right. It's not as if I have any sort of deep like reason that I hold on to the term.
No, I go back and forth. I think you're right too. I'm like, yeah, fuck them. They can't just steal our terms, you know. So like, I go back and forth with it all the time.
To me, it feels like they've lost like the reason why. Like in your video, it talks about the whole like picking apart the layers of things and of essentially why people do shit. Like loads of people, I feel like on the left, quote unquote, have really forgotten what that why is.
We're all just at a football game. We just want our team to win.
Yeah,
that's all.
Well, that's exactly it, isn't it? I mean, it's the left and right wing of what is politically acceptable.
There are certain lifestyle signifiers, though, that I feel like are passwords of entry and sort of limit the populist sort of ethos in that regard. Like one of which is sort of like it's sort of like the runoff of hipsterism in that regard, because like the whole hipster kind of thing died down, and it seems as if the runoff sort of married with politics is what we're sort of seeing now. And you know, some of the lifestyle signifiers are certain aesthetics, like the bi lighting is that sort of the thing that was the big thing. There's also the age demographic as well. There's also things like LGBTQ kind of signifiers as well as like a huge part of it. There are loads of different like sort of lifestyle signifiers that kind of indicate to this specific demographic that I'm one of you, or like you're one, or like you can be one of us too, kind of thing. And yeah, I feel like it can be it's already setting itself up in opposition to basically everything.
It's so weird to be considered part of that aesthetic. Like, so if you have like a queer identity or like you're a person of color and like, you know, you're one of these people who's part of that aesthetic, but yet you feel so alienated from the rhetoric that you're like, it's just this really upside down kind of feeling where you're like, you like me because I'm queer, but you don't like me because you don't like my politics, or am I in the club or not? It's so strange.
Yeah, it is very weird. It's alienating, especially as like a woman of color, because this is the sort of demographic that claims to speak for you. And like, I thought it was really funny that you sort of used Kat Black and sort of her praise of the demographic, because there was a huge sort of argument going on back in the day about Breadtube being way too white. And, you know, they were sort of trying to fill quotas in that regard. And, you know, people like T1J, Kat Black, that For Harriet lady as well, they sort of fit the mold of what you're supposed to be as a creator of color. You're supposed to sort of wholeheartedly toe these sort of very tepid liberal lines. And if you don't, then you're considered a really, really big problem. And you're somebody who is considered a threat to their status quo. And I'm sure it's the same for you as like a queer person or somebody who is sort of into that sort of aesthetic, or who is sort of presents in a certain way, to feel this massive sort of alienation from the so-called demographic that's supposed to represent your interests in terms of media.
Yeah, you're supposed to sort of play the role of they want you to, and it's so limiting, you know, you're supposed to like be the monkey and dance for them and be this sort of caricature of like what they think your identity is supposed to be. And it's like, that's so fucking limiting. Like, why do we all have to like be these like uniform like brands and flavors and shit? Mm-hmm. It's like bigoted in and of itself. It's like bigotry, but like with like a nice like candy coating or something.
It's essentialism. It comes in and it basically says like, you're queer, so that means you're this kind of leftist and you have these beliefs, and it's like, no, that's not how people work. That's not how being a human being works. It's really fucked up, actually.
Yeah. And it's so much nicer to like find common ground with people who are totally different than you. Like that's a nice feeling, you know? Like, why do we all have to just be in a room where we're just echo chambers? I'd rather. That's one thing that I notice about like some of these more like libertarian, conservative types is that they actually really like to be challenged. I have a really old friend from middle school, and he will argue with me till the cows come home. And he just loves it. He loves to like argue about stuff, even though he's like, we're politically like, you know, come from very different ends of the spectrum, but he never takes it offensively. He's like, he loves it. He loves the rigorous challenge and debate.
And I see it reflected in a lot of like different sort of normie, quote unquote, apolitical podcasts where they'll talk about liberals and conservatives or people who share disparate worldviews as having innate differences among each other. What do you think is a decent way of sort of debunking this way of thinking?
I mean, so what I like to think about a lot is that is how we're all rational actors, you know, based off of like our circumstances, right? And I think that there's parts of us that are like essential. And as somebody who's like gender nonconforming, I think about stuff like your essence versus like, because gender is sort of like it's something that you feel essentially in yourself, but it's also the result of your relationship with other human beings, and our brains don't function without a relationship to other human beings. So you can't like separate the two and say, well, I'm just this or just that. They have to work together. So I guess like when you think about what I try to be as I like to be as empathetic to human beings as possible, and just I'd rather understand the rationale behind their behavior and say, well, what is causing them? Because most people act out of like, you know, fear for their material resources, right? And that can be super layered. It doesn't have to be like really obvious that like, oh, you're trying to steal my lollipop. It's like, it could be, you know, and I've mentioned, and I'd like to maybe do a video about social capital, because I think a lot of people think that social capital is just like, oh, my follower count. But it's so much more complicated than that, and it existed before we even had things like the internet or follower counts, and it's something that we all have to operate within, because that's the social capital is what leads to your material resources.
Yes,
and you know, when your material resources are threatened, you have to do things that you wouldn't otherwise do. You know, you might have to go against your own moral code in order to get your material needs met. And I think most people, I mean, everyone's in that situation at some point in their life.
Part of what I'm getting at is like the cultural kind of signifiers, like your values are going to be different. If you went to college, for instance, going to college is a form of social capital. Traveling also gives you a certain amount of social capital as well. Being exposed to ideas and other cultures and things like that, where you live, all of these different things sort of go into your social capital or your social sort of viability in certain marketplaces. And that's kind of where there's a disconnect in the way that a lot of apolitical people talk about these phenomenon, these sort of cultural differences that end up creating a lot of tension. The idea that there are people who come from the suburbs are innately different from people who come from the cities, or people who are non-college educated have an innately different, they're innately different from people who did go to college. Like there's no universality anymore in the way that we sort of view other people, or the idea that there are universal values. We sort of see everything as values that are competing against each other.
I think human beings naturally want to find commonalities, but in order to survive, you know, we have to parse ourselves out, because we're all competing with each other, right, for the resources.
We also have similar needs and similar desires too, and similar vulnerabilities as well, which I feel like is something that's sort of obfuscated by the culture war that we see constantly raging in front of us, is that we're all vulnerable. And one of the really interesting things that you said in the video was the idea that a lot of people, I mean, you used Caleb Kane, you used him as an example of somebody who went from being an alienated white male rage right winger to then being an alienated woke, left wing sort of consumer in that regard, and that the thing that wasn't really addressed was the alienation itself, which I thought was a really good point. What do you think about this in terms of ways that people who create left content online can actually sort of point people towards dealing with the source of the alienation rather than just profiting off of it?
I don't know. And I think a lot of it is that we all have to kind of admit that we don't have answers to a lot of these questions. And I think when people like us critique things, we'll often get this response of like, well, what's your solution then? And that feels like the quintessential like liberal response to any kind of critique. Well, I'd like to see you do better kind of thing. And it's this sort of rhetorical trap that people get in. And the thing is, like, if somebody's telling you that they have the answers and what to do, they're probably full of shit, like, don't listen to them. I think the best thing that people can do, and here's me giving advice, is like, just like think about stuff, take some time to like reflect on your own thoughts. We're constantly like looking for other people's like thoughts to be like shot into our brains all the time, and we kind of forget. And it's that like conventional wisdom of just like go like meditate or whatever, or like do whatever you want, and just kind of like think about how things make you feel. Think about when you hear information, like how does that make you feel? Why do you feel that way? What are the mechanisms that are triggering responses in you? I think that's the only way to kind of go about it.
Also try to seek out people who might have similar responses and similar interests, and just sort of corroborate information, etc. Become
a Peter Coffin orbiter. It's always so funny when people like will say shit like that to me, and I'm like, yeah, because Peter's cool and like has great ideas. Like, is that like a bad thing that you want to like talk to people who have like similar opinions? It's like the weirdest shit.
Yeah, it's odd. I'm definitely the prime quote unquote Peter Coffin orbiter. Like I'm the
now I'm a Peter and Angie orbiter.
Yeah, you better fucking be. I'm the OG of this operation. I'm kidding. Now my ego's gotten into it, so we're gonna be here for a while now. I'm joking.
Angie, I first found your videos when I was like really sick one day, and I was just like binge watching YouTube. And the video with like the Bob Ross stuff was so nice and comforting.
Thank you. That's like old Angie. That was like before a pre-apocalypse Angie.
That was pre-social justice is a clout game.
Pre-social exactly.
Before you were corrupted.
And then of course Jake helps me make everything that I make as well. So
that Bob Ross video was actually my idea to get you really inspired and getting into creativity again, wasn't it? That actually kind of gave you loads of momentum for your YouTube channel and everything.
Or everything I do, he's the sperm, I'm the egg and the machine, basically. So we're a joint operation. Anyway, moving back on, there was a really interesting thing that was sort of explored by Bernays when he was sort of writing about propaganda. And I think this is sort of a thing that we can use to unlock what our role is. Ironically, since it comes from Bernays. But he sort of talked about it when he was talking about motion picture and film and how it's sort of the most sort of distilled form of propaganda and how it's sort of able to sort of change the minds of people and manipulate the consciousness. But it doesn't actually, he made the distinction that it doesn't actually it doesn't spur new ideas. It doesn't inspire people to gestate and generate new ideas. It just sort of forces, it socially engineers them to follow already established ones. And I feel like we should be doing the opposite. We should be trying to push people towards examination of and synthesis of new ideas. And I feel like that's sort of the function that the left online, or whatever you want to call it, I don't even know if I want to call it the left, but materialist sort of analysis focused content online needs to occupy. We need to sort of inspire people to generate and synthesize new forms of ideas, new forms of analysis.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess just like you got to just kind of reject all the incentives that are on these platforms, to like, I think what Peter did was cool as far as like being like fuck Breadtube and like blocking everyone, because it's like we're so incentivized to do the opposite, you know, to do the opposite all the time. And I don't know if there is like a trick of like how to get people to crack, you know, as you know, Peter was saying before, crack the veneer. It really has to come from like their own moment. Like even Simon Sinek was talking in the video about how our decisions come from our limbic brain or something like that. You know, this sort of internal lizard brain that relates to the world based on like feelings and shit. Mm-hmm. And that once we believe something, we will do whatever we have to rationalize that belief. Mm-hmm. So it's so hard to like reach people by like telling them like, well, here's this fact and this fact and this fact. Mm-hmm. They don't say, oh yeah, you're right. They like it's this really hard thing that you have to kind of, and I don't even know, because it's really like, it's deep, it's psychological. It is. I don't know. What's the antidote? I don't know.
I don't think I know the antidote, but I feel like there are certain keys. Because I know that one way that the right wing has been incredibly successful is through like the sort of pill meme ideology, where they're sort of able to create kind of psychological hacks that manage to be able to convey dense amounts of information, but through very sort of bite-sized, distilled ways. And that is something that, you know, you talked about PragerU in the video and how they have these really short videos that are able to, and how it like over 1 billion Americans have seen their videos and all of this stuff. And then you have left-wing content, which tends to be these incredibly like long form, like video essay kind of thing.
Well, the hard thing about looking to what the right does successfully is that they're always going to be successful because they're flowing with the current. Yeah. They're not going upstream. They work hand in hand with, you know, that's the thing, is like they have no qualms about being like, yeah, we're capitalists. This is the game. We're playing the game. You know, whereas like the left tries to pretend like, oh no, we want to be the good guys, you know, like
it's hard though, because people see it as a war for the psyche. And that's really what is going on, because that's what capitalism manipulates in order to get us down these consumption paths. And they have been sort of socially engineering us and manipulating our psychology and manipulating our response patterns and all of those different things, which you talked about in terms of algorithms. So that's kind of where people who have material analysis are at a loss, is how do we counter this move to manipulate psychology? How do we communicate to those deep unconscious parts of people? How do we circumvent this process and give people sort of the psychic defense mechanisms that they need?
Well, it did reveal, obviously, a truth that we all know, is that it's the marketing wing of the same like Illuminati Bilderberg group that are doing these social engineering projects in both America and England. As they were saying, like, it's the same psychologists that are working for Reagan and Thatcher, and we were so surprised. And then you hear, oh, it's the same think tank that both Steve Bannon and Dominic Cummings are both palling around with, and you're just like, oh, okay, so it's all part of the same bullshit. And the way they do a lot of it, and what you showed largely in that thing, is one of my fucking major hates of life, is advertisements. And that is largely how they fucking do it, is by telling you need shit, like the fucking the stupid fucking quote. It's telling you need shit to buy shit you don't need with fucking debt that you fucking are going to acquire regardless.
Like body spray is like fulfilling your deeply held desires.
That's the best
You're gonna get bitches. You're gonna get a lot of bitches. Your inceldom is over.
Put on X.
But that's the thing though, is it's like the same thing happened where we were told that we needed Breadtube in order to circumvent the rise of fascism. And I never want to moralize or look at certain individuals as bad. They're just following the incentives that are placed in front of them. And a lot of them have this sort of mentality of using quote unquote the master's tools to take down the master's house, that all we need to do is set up an equally successful demographic. All we need to do is set up an equally successful business model in order to circumvent what we consider bad. But it always ends up recreating the exact same kind of pattern.
I need to be sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends. How can I compete with PragerU?
Yeah, no, that's why this video, I feel like it really parallels to the kind of stuff that I was looking at with the nonprofit industrial complex, because Peter Buffett says the same thing about like the master's tools and the master's house. And that was this wall that I kept hitting with like, sort of the activist organizer circles, is that I'm like, if we're taking money from like capitalists, how are we fighting them? This just doesn't seem to work if we're just spinning in circles, and capitalism is just going to become just like, I think a really key term that was brought up in the Bernays propaganda clip was that the values will always change. So like society is always just going to be like evolving into more and more woke forms, and capitalism is just going to keep keeping up with that. So if you're just looking at like, well, what's woke and what's not, you're just following capitalism as it evolves, because capitalism doesn't have morals. I think that's like that's the big mistake that a lot of people make, is they think like, well, capitalism's just for the bad people and the good people are like. But capitalism doesn't give a shit about like gender or skin color or any of that shit. Capitalism just cares about markets. So like literally anything and everything will get turned into markets. So like we shouldn't worry about like the moral arguments as much if that's what we're interested in fighting.
Exactly. It's a difficult bend, because it does sort of, I think the reason why a lot of people react hostilely to this sort of market analysis of activism, quote unquote, left-wing politics online, is because they view it as their only avenue to sort of shape the world that they want to see, or to be politically active in that regard. And then on the other end, there are the people who do it as a job, and they sort of feel like, what does this mean about my place? What am I doing? How am I contributing to these dynamics? And these are very hard questions to ask, but it starts by, and me and Peter, like I said, have been banging this drum for a very long time, like since my video, Social Justice Can Be a Clout Game, which was actually inspired by some really bad incidents that happened with that whole like Breadtube demographic or whatever.
Let me tell you, Angie, when I saw that video, it was such a relief to see you talking about that, because I was experiencing that kind of stuff in like the organizing world, and it was unbelievable. I was like, it really is just this clout game.
Yep.
And I was like, everybody needs to watch this. Holy shit.
Yeah. The careerist kind of tangent is what I was sort of critiquing in that video. But it runs a lot deeper than just the sort of careerist aspect. There's also just the sort of the community aspect, quote unquote, the fact that people think it is sort of a cure to their atomized feelings, that they finally found people or a community of ideas that sort of represents and sort of reflect. It's a very pernicious form of marketing, and this sort of marketing is only going to get like worse as technology sort of enables it to get deeper and deeper and deeper into our psychology and into our very beings and needs and desires and impulses. What do you think? Should we be encouraging people to sort of get offline? Because that's sort of a thing that I see people flippantly kind of say all the time, is like log off kind of thing. Like,
I know.
Don't just go and ride your bicycle or do whatever people do out in the real world.
We're just telling people to do Queen songs.
Yeah, literally.
You talking about me?
I am talking a bit about you. Like people who just like yell log off and tell you to like do a puzzle or like, all of those different things.
So much of that every single day. People be like, you should just log off. And it's like,
but even then, there's an element of it that's true. There's an element of it that's also sort of individualizing mass problems. The fact of the matter is public space is receding, especially because of coronavirus and all of these things. Like meaningful activity and exposure is sort of getting incredibly concentrated on life.
One thing that really bothers me a lot, and I saw this with like the latest sort of Twitter Breadtube kind of blow up thing, is people being like, this is just the internet, and you have to like, get out into the real world and start organizing. And I'm like, fuck that. I've done that. That shit is fucked up too. Like
it's fucked up in the same way.
It is. I hate when people write it off as like, it's just the internet, because it's not. It's like, it's not. This is just
all my experience with the offline leftists, none of them are like this.
Yeah, I've heard that. So again, to quote the video again, where Noam Chomsky is like talking to, that one kid who's like, well, I work for Student Press, and he just shuts them down because he's like, well, that's because nobody's paying attention to you and you're not challenging any power. If you start to like challenge power, then people will come after you. But if nobody's challenging you, or if nobody's like angry at you, that's why I'm like, being called a bigot or a racist or a transphobe, like I'm almost starting to wear it as a badge of honor these days, because like that's what people do. When I know I'm not these things, but that's what people use now to like gaslight you and say, oh no, you are offending people, you are causing harm, you are doing this, you are doing that. It's like, but who the fuck am I? I have no power. Even if I say the most fucked up shit ever, like it's not gonna do anything. Like, who cares? That's why it's frustrating when people are like, it's just the internet, you need to get off the internet. Like, no, the things that are happening on the internet are parallel to what's happening in real life. Let's not ignore this behavior. Let's take a hard look at what's actually happening, because it's not that the internet is bad. The internet fucking rocks. I love the internet. It's that capitalism has ruined the internet. The internet was so cool when it first came out. I was like obsessed with it as a kid and like a teenager. And then like slowly in the 2000s, it just got shittier and shittier and shittier. And why is that? You know, because like it's these few websites that are just dominating the whole space.
We have these mediating platforms acting as the public square. Like we were just talking about, the public square is retreated. So you have these platforms acting as the public square. The platforms themselves are owned. And the character of the company that owns these platforms ends up getting imprinted on all the discourse. And you have all of the incentives just sort of lining themselves up to just like they just launched that new fleets feature on Twitter. And don't get me wrong, I think it's fun. It's a fun thing, but like it's very obvious that like that is a thing that works for social platforms, and they're shoehorning it into Twitter as well, because they've got it on Instagram, on Facebook, on like 10 other platforms. I don't fucking know, but like that stuff comes in and gets people communicating in the modes that they want people communicating in. And ultimately, that changes the behavior of how we're acting. So can you just get offline? Sure, you could just get offline. But I mean, this stuff happens in real life as well. You have like various, whether it be a mediating platform or you talk about a media that is repeating your information, you still have telephone. You still have people like not accurately repeating information or something that you've said to someone else. Like rumors still start in real life, and there's still ways to take advantage of that as, institutional forces in a local area. I mean, that stuff still happens. And that's the thing that I think really people don't think about when they're like, well, if we just get off the internet and start spending our time in real life. No, like the problem isn't the avenue in which we're intending. It is the institutional power imposing a mediating force into our social relationships, in my opinion anyways.
And that mediating force oftentimes exacerbates tensions, and purposefully as well. And I feel like, because that's another thing that I get really annoyed about when I watch like the centrist bro shit, is they're always like, everything's so divisive. That's another trope. Is like, why is everything so divisive now? We're so divided. Why is everyone so divided? And it's like, there are legit, like obviously there are certain contradictions that have arisen out of the current stage of capitalism they're in that we can no longer ignore, which is one aspect of it. But another aspect of it is that there's an entire system and ideology that governs us. And I feel like so many of these problems are due to the fact that neoliberalism is so invisible. People sort of see it as a state of nature, including the people who sort of identify as left tube online. They think that it doesn't matter that I'm following all these incentives. I'm doing it for good. Like someone like a Vosh is sort of like a prime example of what happens when somebody who may have had good intentions going in just sort of follows the market incentives down to a fucking T. What it turns you into, you start to lose yourself and lose whatever principles that you may have had, because you're governed by something that is way bigger than you and that has way more power than you do to shape the mode.
Yeah.
2 words, anarcho-Bidenism.
Yeah,
That's all I have to say.
Exactly.
Oh,
like
God.
exactly.
Yeah.
Like that's what you end up with when you sort of follow the incentives of the system to their sort of natural, logical conclusion. But I understand why, because it's financially lucrative too, not to. And like me and Peter and I, have committed career harakiri over and over again. Because one of the things that this system incentivizes you to do is to be sort of sycophantic towards people who have more clout than you, so that you can be in their orbit and you can sort of leech off of them. And by rejecting people or alienating people, we have basically cut ourselves off from those avenues of growth, quote unquote. You also, by not sort of creating certain types of content, not trying to appeal to a certain demographic of people, not pigeonholing ourselves into what people would expect us to be. Like, I'm supposed to be like a 4 Harriet and like talk about why Beyonce slays or whatever, and I'd have like 2 billion subscribers by now. And
why
like
Beyonce slaying takes down capitalism, which is evil.
Yeah.
Here's how.
Yeah, literally that kind of stuff is what would definitely make me successful in that regard. But like I said, the reason why people follow these incentives is because it's fucking lucrative to do so. It's lucrative. Like if I wanted an easy life and I wanted an easy way, I would make videos about why Beyonce slays and about, you know, all of these sort of cultural kind of, you know, nods to specific demographics that feel sort of cozy and warm and validating. You're someone who's fairly new. How long have you been making videos for?
Just over a year.
What's your raison d'etre when it comes to creating videdos? What do you get out of it? Like your reason.
Such a film
Sacre
student.
bleu.
Why do you have to be mean to me?
Such a film student.
Why do you have to be mean to me?
Now go away or I will taunt you a second time.
Fuck all of you.
I'm a simpleton, Andy.
Andy speaks.
Andy speaks.
This is why I need to go back to the warm embrace of Breadtube, so that I'm no longer. I'm joking. But
You
yeah,
can say all your French words all you want. They won't let you back. They won't let you back.
No one will call me pretentious as well. My pride is wounded.
You keep using big words. What do these words mean?
What was I saying? Yeah, raison d'etre, which I'm probably mispronouncing anyway, but it's like sort of your reason for being. Like, what is the reason that you make YouTube videos? What do you get out of the experience, and what are you hoping to sort of accomplish?
It's catharsis, really. It's a creative outlet, because like I feel like all the time I love talking to people and connecting with people, and like but it's so fucking hard now. And like when I do talk to people, I feel like I'm one of these people who kind of thinks in a really big, broad scope of things, and when I talk about things, I kind of look like the guy from Always Sunny with the maps and stuff.
Charlie.
And all the strings.
Pepe Sylvia shit.
Yeah. And I'm like, I think in pictures instead of words. So sometimes it's hard to sort of like put all my thoughts into parse that into language that's like this linear language. So making videos is like this really great avenue for me to sort of like just get this shit out of my brain, you know, and like, and there's so many people who will be like, no, why do you have to be such a hater, this and that? And like, they don't understand what you're trying to get across, and they think that you're an asshole or whatever. And I'm like, I'm not an asshole. I just like want to share my worldview with people. And I think just videos are a good avenue for that for me. And I'm an artsy fartsy person, so
same here. I feel like it's the same, similar with you and a handful of other creators, including myself and Peter too, who have this sort of aesthetic resemblance to Breadtube, quote unquote. But then people click on our videos and get angry because they're like, I ordered something different. Yeah, this isn't the consumer product that I wanted.
And they start calling us haters and losers. And
I secretly love pissing people off, though. Like,
same here.
I don't think it's that big of a secret that anybody present likes to piss people off, at least a little.
I love to like piss people off, like in They Live, force them to put the glasses, like beat the shit out of them, force them to put the glasses on, but then like give them a big hug and be like, it's okay, we're in this together, buddy. Like now that you know the truth, you know the horror that I see all the time.
I find this is another thing that I've sort of like started to grapple with, because the introduction to your video is like that really funny bit where Matt Christman and the people from TrueAnon were making fun of Breadtube.
Yeah.
And they were like, oh, it's all this like wacky, like, whoa, kind of like content, which is very true. Like it has an it's accurate. It has like an affectual sort of it's over the top affectually. Why are you laughing at me? Is affectual too much of a fucking $10 word?
Just you're like, whoa, is that how you see your videos?
I do. That's what I was going to say.
They're 100% right in their criticism.
They're 100% right. But the thing is,
YouTube.
I feel like the cool people don't want to talk to those, because a lot of where the good analysis comes from is podcasting. Let's just be honest. Podcasting on average has better analysis in terms of left content than what you'll find on YouTube. And I feel like the podcast world doesn't want to sort of talk to the YouTube world because they associate it with like rad lib, like, whoa. But then again, I don't want to give up the kind of weird theatrical over the topness, because I enjoy it, and I think you can have that and also have good politics. There are some people who seem to think that aesthetic is totally in contradiction to having good politics, or that aesthetic is sort of solely the domain of like liberal left nonsense and like identity nonsense and blah, blah, blah. But that's the thing. I don't want to surrender that territory the same way I sort of have a discomfort with sort of surrendering the term left. Like I really enjoy dressing up and being weird and being all like, whoa. It's not everyone's cup of tea, but I think it's unfair to make those sort of aesthetic judgments. And I know a lot of the sort of Marxist like material left does. They like, oh, you're a fucking YouTuber, you fucking you fucking chill.
They,
like
they take it as a sign that you're taking the incentives of the platform, and it might just be that you're a kind of goofy person.
I mean, not all of us can be hedonic like fucking weirdos. Like, you know,
You're a theatre kid.
I'm a theater kid.
You're a theatre kid, and a lot of the lefty YouTubers are theatre kids. Let's be real. And
but not lefties.
Exactly.
They're not actual lefties. Yeah.
But then I feel like a lot of the demographic is also possibly maybe kind of theatre kids as well, but they just like can't make the theatre though.
Yeah,
they
that's
just
true.
want to watch the theatre. They're the theatre goers, and the makers are the theatre kids.
Yeah, but then again, again, a lot of the sort of considered kosher or considered sort of like acceptable aesthetic and affectual presence of people who are sort of doing this sort of thing is like ahedonic and sarcastic and you know, kind of bemused, and I don't see anything wrong with that. In fact, I find that kind of affect interesting and funny, and you know, but it's not who I am. I'm somebody who is I'm earnest.
Yeah.
In a way that's almost cringe. Like I'm cringe. Yeah. That's the reason why I like your content so much, because we're all very earnest people to borderline cringe levels of earnestness. Like
you have like sincere Bambi eyes that you put on in like some parts of your videos when you're like, guys, listen.
People are dying.
It's like movie Bob, you know, poor guy, people were just ragging on him, and I'm like, like he's been super nasty to me, but I'm like,
he's a bit of a cunt, but you know,
I'm like, oh, poor guy.
I know.
You know?
No, when Lindsay Ellis slapped him down, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Look, that's just like that's like soap opera, like telenovela fucking bullshit. But I understand why. Like I have sympathy for anyone who's like sad too. Like I'm not the type of person that dances on people's graves. I'm also like generally like very earnest, and I'm also quite over the top and theatrical and like dramatic or whatever. And I feel like sometimes the quote unquote materialist left falls into the trap of judging people based upon their aesthetic signifiers and their affect. But I understand why, because it's shorthand to distinguish friend from enemy, but it's dangerous because then you start getting into the territory of like shibboleths and stuff.
But that's literally the neoliberal mode. Like it literally actually is the consumer ideology where like you're a fan of that, I'm a fan of this. Right. I can tell by what you look like that you're a fan of that, and people who are a fan of this, we don't like that.
Yeah.
I was on some sort of group that's sort of like internet. It's like definitely like millennial film lovers like sort of thing. It's a very weird niche little fucking group I found. But they basically made like a meme of a screenshot of that Lindsay Ellis movie Bob interaction and just like asking, has anyone else been cucked by their heroes? And then I think someone replied underneath with the James Gunn Martin Scorsese interaction.
Oh God.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
That's the thing though, like it is like you do see the consumer behavior in that. Like Bob was consuming the idea that he was somehow a colleague of this person that he's a fan of, and that person just sort of swatted him down. It's like, no, I fucking hate this person. They always try to be my fucking friend, and I fucking hate that shit. Fuck that shit.
God.
He's a bitch, and it's
so
misogynistic, and fuck that shit. And
even then, they're the same thing.
oh, I know they're the same thing. Here's the thing: if Lindsay Ellis was doing it with somebody, and somebody said, like, oh, let's pick some big name that Lindsay Ellis probably likes, like Peter Jackson.
Anita Sarkeesian or something.
And let's say either one of those people was like, actually, you know what? Lindsay Ellis is always trying to be my friend, and I fucking hate that shit. Fuck her, and get the fuck away from me. Like, she would be devastated in the exact same consumer way, because she's taking in that stuff in the same sort of commodified way that like everybody is in this mode. Like we're not saying that like the creators are better or worse than the marketing demographic, and we're not making a moral judgment. It's a mode that's been set. This is the ideology that is running this society, and we're stuck on it. And that the whole thing is attempting to at least get it to the point where people understand it. And then if people can understand it and start moving in the direction of like actually bouncing ideas off each other, doing some form of it doesn't have to be in person. It could very well be over the internet, but some form of like corroboration and collaboration as to actually undermine these types of dynamics. That's the only way we actually get anywhere. And people, they want a simple solution, like, oh, get offline. That's a simple solution. They want, give me an action to perform that would signify to others that I am an activist. I am a real, it's not, that's not the problem. The problem is that this is a whole mode which subsumes the various like impulses, the various needs, the various wants of people, stuff that is perfectly human. It's inextricably like fine to want like somebody who did something you think is cool to be your friend, for instance. But it becomes this like clout oriented and game oriented interaction where you're consuming something and you're also attempting to schmooze. You're also attempting you're trying to get something out of it. It's transactional, and that's ultimately at the core of all of this. And I think that you do a really good job in this video pointing at that.
So if I don't think any of us would actually get ourselves in this situation, but if like a hero of yours was to cuck you publicly like that, who would it be like the most impactful for? Like
it happens to me privately all the time because I have to get guests on for the show. And luckily it's not publicly, but like we reached out to our boy Slavoy, and he was like, oh, I'm like not feeling good or something. But then he appeared on like a podcast like the next day or whatever. And my heart broke. And I was like, Slavoy.
He's done that to both of us now too, like multiple times. I've checked in with him.
That's cool.
I feel like if Slavoj Žižek was like, Angie, you're garbage, and was like, you're rubbish, and you keep trying to come and be my friend, but I don't want to be your friend.
You keep trying to be my friend, but I do not want this. You need to stop doing this. And you need to go away.
Oh no.
Fuck off. Go away.
Well, it was really wonderful to have you on, Fox. It was a great conversation, and your video is also really excellent. And I highly recommend that people go and check out your channel, Space Commune. Do you want to shout out anything else, plug anything?
No, just check out my YouTube channel and hang out with me on Twitter, and I'll try to tweet more and be like an online shitlord or whatever.
What's your handle?
It's Fox G Green.
Awesome.
And thank you guys for having me on. It was a lot of fun.
Well,
No
of
problem.
course.
It was great.
We'll probably
We should
have you
have-
on again to talk about the nonprofit industrial complex one.
Yeah,
'Cause that's
really-
a much. I mean, that's like probably a bigger, more important subject than Breadtube even.
Yeah, we'll definitely have you on again to talk about that, because that was another excellent piece of analysis that you've given. Thank you to the audience as well. Thank you guys for listening. We appreciate you guys. Thanks to all the patrons as well. If you want access to our bonus episodes, join us on Patreon. If you want to stalk us on Reddit, we have one. If you want to follow us on Twitter, we got Twitter. If you want to check out our YouTube, we're basically everywhere online. And also, if you're listening on iTunes, 5 stars, none of that 3-star shit. On iTunes. Or is it Apple Podcasts? One of the fucking things that people listen to. Give us a 5-star.
If you can rate us with stars, 5 of them.
5 of
Thanks.
them. Don't
Yum,
none
yum,
of that
yes.
pussy 3-star bullshit. Like, we'll come to your house, we'll find you. We know where you live. Thank you guys for listening, and we shall catch you later. Goodbye.